There is a small word in your wallet tonight, older than almost any other word in modern currency. The word is shekel. It was, more than 3,500 years ago, a weight, a small exact measure of silver, balanced in a bronze pan against a known stone. Babylonian merchants spoke it. So did Phoenicians, Hebrews, and Aramaic-speaking traders, all the way down to your dictionary. The contract you signed this month, somewhere in the careful counting of money, still carries the quiet shape of that weight. This is a quiet place to fall asleep and to wake up knowing one small thing you did not know before. So let yourself settle now. The day is done, and there is nothing more it asks of you. Let your shoulders soften. Let the air come slow and easy. The night is wide. It can hold what we leave in it. Tonight, we walk into Babylon, late spring, more than 3,700 years ago, into a small workshop where a dark stone is being polished by lamplight. The stone is not yet finished. The king who ordered it is not yet asleep. Both will be before the night is done. A few streets back from the Euphrates, in a quiet quarter of Babylon where the temple workshops cluster like a small family of low buildings around a shared yard, a man in a plain robe stands very still at an open doorway. He has come down the long stone steps of the palace alone, without escort, the way an older man sometimes goes for a small private walk in the evening. He is the king. He is Hammurabi, 6th king of Babylon, in the 42nd year of his rule, a year that the river has been kind to and the harvest has not yet asked any worried questions of. His hand rests on the doorframe, inside the workshop, by the light of 2 oil lamps. A single piece of dark stone stands upright on a low wooden cradle. It is about the height of a tall man, and it has been polished today for many hours. The stone is not yet finished. You can see where the lamplight slides across it, the faint roughness of one shoulder where the polishers have not yet brought the surface to the deep, even darkness of the rest of the column. The stone is just over 7 feet tall, about 2¼ meters if you were to measure it in the way later languages will. It tapers very slightly, broader at its base, narrower at its rounded top. The lamps reflect on its wet flank in a long, slow, almost living ribbon of light. 2 workmen are still there, very quietly putting their tools away for the night. One folds the small linen clothes that have held the polishing reed dust. The other gathers up the soft river sand he has been using for the last of the smoothing. Neither speaks. They are not unaware of the king at the door, but the king has been here in the evenings, often enough this year that his presence has the same texture as the lamplight. Something they know is there, something they do not have to look at. The king is not here to give an order. A king is, in a quiet way, here to see the stone. He has been thinking about it for many seasons. He has read it again on its other side, in its draft form on smaller clay tablets, the long poem of the prologue, the nearly 300 rulings, the closing prayer to the city's gods. He has heard the scribes read it aloud to him. He has, more than once, in the audience halls of the palace, made small changes to a single word. The stone in the workshop will stand, when it is finished, in the main court of the great temple of Marduk, where every literate man and woman in Babylon and every literate visitor from cities upriver and downriver will be able to see it, what the king cannot yet know, and what we know only because we are looking back across a very long evening, is how far the stone is going to travel. It will not stand only in Marduk's temple. It will stand there certainly for many lifetimes after this evening. It will be looked at by traders, by judges, by scribes copying its laws onto their own clay for their own city archives. The king's name and the rulings will be referred to, copied, taught, for hundreds of years. But 6 centuries from this night, long after this king's bones have become part of the city's quiet earth, another king from a country in the eastern lowlands will send his soldiers into Babylon and take the stone away. They will load it onto a heavy cart. They will carry it east into a city called Susa on the edge of the mountains. They will set it up there in their own temple as a trophy, and then after that, the stone will go silent for almost 3,000 years. The city of Susa will rise and fall. Whole empires will pass over the place where the stone stands. The very temple in which it has been set will collapse, its bricks slowly returning to the dust. The stone very gradually will be covered by that dust. A man could walk across the ground above it and never know there was a stone underneath. Travelers' donkeys will tread the path above it. Goats will graze the grass that grows up out of the soil that has buried it. For almost 3,000 years, the stone will lie there, quietly, in a darkness more complete than the darkness of any closed workshop, waiting. And then, in the spring of the year 1901, by a count of years the king cannot imagine, although his own laws will help to teach later cities how to count their years, a small group of men in pale cotton coats, French archaeologists led by a man named Jacques de Morgan, working at the great mound of Susa, will one careful day lift a final basket of earth away from a long, dark, curved surface. They will see in their lamps the same wet ribbon of light that the king is seeing in this workshop tonight, and they will, very gently, with brushes and small soft tools, uncover what the king is at this moment quietly examining. The stone will then travel by ship to a city on the Seine. It will be set upright in a long glass hall in a museum called the Louvre. School children of an entirely unknown people, in entirely unknown clothes, speaking an entirely unknown set of languages, will stand in front of it and read what is carved on its face. They will read most of it. Almost the whole text will still be there after all those centuries underground. That is the strange small mercy of this stone. The men who will carry it away 6 centuries from now will be the same men who could have destroyed its words. They will not. They will take it as a prize, not as a target. They will erase a small panel near one shoulder to add their own conqueror's name, the way one might pencil a brief note in the corner of a borrowed book. But they will leave the king's rulings, the long poem of the prologue, the closing prayer, all of it almost untouched. The act that should have buried the stone's words will instead preserve them. The king does not know any of this. He cannot. He is this evening simply a tall man in a plain robe with one hand on the doorframe, looking at a half-polished stone by the light of 2 oil lamps. He is thinking, probably, although we cannot quite see his thoughts, about whether the line on the stone's lower side will be readable from a few paces away once the polish is finished. He is wondering, very softly, whether the temple priests have decided yet on the angle the column will face when it is finally raised in its court. He is thinking about a long day. He is thinking about a small letter that arrived this afternoon. He is thinking about the cooler air that has just begun to come in from the river. Above the stone's polished face, at the top of the column, the workshop's chief carver has spent many weeks on a different kind of work. There, in shallow relief, you can see two figures. One is the king himself, in a simple long robe, standing upright, his right hand lifted in the gesture of address. The other is the sun god Shamash, seated on a low throne, his bearded face turned toward the king, small flames rising from each of his shoulders. His feet rest on a small mountain, the slope of stone from behind which, each morning of every season, he rises. He is holding two small objects out toward the king. They look, to a modern eye, like a short rod and a coiled loop of rope. They are not weapons. They are not exactly the law. They are a builder's measuring rod and a surveyor's loop, the tools by which a fair line is drawn between two pieces of land, between two parties to a contract. What the god is giving the king is the means of measuring out what is just. The image will later be reduced in popular memory to the gods giving the law. That is a kind of half-truth. The actual carving says something closer to this, the means of measurement. You can see in the lamplight the very faint chisel tracks where the carver has cut the small flames rising from the god's shoulders. The work is delicate. It is also old craft. The way the figures stand in profile, the way the king's beard descends in tight, neat curls. All of this is a kind of slow visual grammar inherited from cities older than Babylon. The carver did not invent it. He learned it from a master who learned it from a master. The stone is new. The way of carving the figures on it is very old. The king looks at the relief for a long moment. The chief carver, not present in the workshop tonight, has done good work. The king nods slightly to himself. The workmen do not see it. The lamps go on burning their slow yellow light. The polishers who have been working on the stone today are not, in any modern sense, a guild. They are a small handful of men from two related families that have worked stone in this city for as long as anyone can remember. The oldest of them, the chief polisher away tonight, is 68 years old. He learned the trade from his uncle. His uncle had learned it from his grandfather. Between them, the men in these two families have polished, over the long generations, the dark surfaces of more than 30 significant stones that now stand in various temples and gateways of the city, small carved gods set in alcoves, larger memorial slabs, the polished thresholds of palace doorways, the door sockets that bear on their underside the name of the king who set the door in its frame. The technique they are using on the king's stone is older than the city. It is in its plain body very simple, a soft mixed paste of river sand and crushed reed dust, worked over the stone's surface with linen cloths in slow circular motions by patient hands for hours and hours. The reed dust is finer than the sand. The sand is finer than what the river itself produces, because the men sieve it twice through a tight woven mesh before they bring it into the workshop. Every motion of the cloth on the stone takes off a layer of roughness that is smaller than a grain of barley dust. The polish moves forward by tiny visible steps. A small flat hand mirror, the kind people keep on a low table by a wash bowl, would let you perhaps watch one small patch of the stone become a little darker, a little smoother, over the course of a single hour. The two workmen still in the room tonight will in a moment finish stowing their cloths and their sands. They will check once that the lamps are placed at a safe distance from any cloth. They will leave the lamps burning. The apprentice on his folded mat just inside the door will keep an eye on them until the second watch. They will go home to their own families in two of the small low houses just behind the workshop, where their wives have, since the lamps in the workshop first went on a few hours ago, been keeping a small portion of warm stew on a low brazier for them. The king, watching them from the doorway, knows them by name. He has known them for many years. He will not interrupt them. He will in a moment step quietly back and turn and walk slowly back up the long stone steps of the palace, alone the way he came down. The temple of Marduk, where the stone will one day stand, is on the other side of the city. He will not go there tonight. He has seen what he came to see. Somewhere outside, in the cooling courtyards a few streets over, smaller stones, small slabs of clay the size of a man's palm, are drying on shelves under linen cloths, waiting for the morning, waiting for the day's transactions to be set into them. So, while the lamps in the workshop are being trimmed for the second time of the night, let us, very softly, leave this room. Let us go and stand for a little while in the courtyards where the day's other writing is being put away. A few streets from the workshop where the stone is being polished, in a quarter of the city that smells very faintly of river mud and of damp linen, there is a small courtyard surrounded by low mud brick rooms with reed mat doors. 3 lamps hang from a thin wooden beam stretched across the open air. On long flat tables set under the lamps, 2 scribes are stacking the day's small writings into a soft basket lined with cloth. The writings are not on paper. There is no paper in Babylon, and there will not be paper anywhere in the world for another 1700 years. The writings are not on parchment. That too has not yet come into general use. The writings are on small flat slabs of grey-brown clay, each one about the width of a man's palm, each one bearing the careful neat wedge marks of cuneiform, each one still slightly damp at its center. This is the everyday medium of Babylon. The dramatic monumental stone in the workshop is the exception, not the rule. Most of what gets written in this city gets written on these small soft palm tablets, and most of what is written is not poetry or prayer. Most of what is written is the patient record of who has agreed to give what to whom, by when, and on what terms. A marriage is, in Babylon, a written contract on clay. A man and a woman agreeing to live together, agreeing on a bride price, on what the woman will keep if the marriage ends, on what will happen if the husband dies first, on what will happen if the wife has no children, will sit with their 2 families and several witnesses before a scribe. The scribe will press the terms into the wet clay with a cut reed stylus. The two families will each name in front of the witnesses their assent. The bride price will be carefully described: 3 measures of barley, 2 sheep, a small cylinder seal, a bolt of dyed wool. The protections for the wife will be carefully described, that if abandoned, she may return to her father's house with the full bride price, that if widowed without children, she may keep the house she lived in. The witnesses will press the rim of their own small seals into a separate strip of clay running below the agreement. The clay will be set aside to dry. By the next morning, the marriage contract will be a small hard ceramic object, kept in a sealed envelope of further clay, kept in a private archive in the family's house, kept perhaps for 3 generations. Every literate household in this city has at least 1 cylinder seal. The seal is a small carved cylinder, perhaps the size of a thumb, made of a hard stone, a piece of dark hematite, a small piece of carved shell, a small slice of carnelian, or a dark glassy piece carried in from far away. The cylinder is pierced through its long axis so that a thin cord can be passed through it, and the owner usually wears it on the cord, around the neck, under the robe, as a small private object. The cylinder is carved on its outer surface with a small scene: a man before his patron god, an animal motif, a god seated on a throne, and the carving is in reverse, so that when the cylinder is rolled across wet clay, the scene appears raised in the surface. The cylinder with its scene is the man's signature. No two are exactly alike. A man's cylinder seal is, in a quiet way, the most personal small object he owns, more personal even than his outer robe. When the marriage contract is being made, this is how the 2 parties sign it. They take their cylinder seals from around their necks, and they roll them across the wet edge of the clay, leaving the small raised scenes in the surface. The witnesses do the same. The result, at the bottom of the tablet, is a small frieze of overlapping miniature scenes, a row of tiny gods and tiny worshippers and tiny animals, the way a strip of small portraits might run along the bottom of a much larger painting. The frieze is the row of names of the witnesses. The frieze is also, in some quiet sense, a small congregation of household gods bearing witness. A small touching thing about these seals is that 3,000 years from now, the people who will sift them out of the dust will find them mostly intact. The stones are too hard for the soil to wear away. The carved scenes are too small to be of immediate value to looters. Every small museum in the future world will hold in its drawers dozens or hundreds of these little cylinders, each one, rolled across a soft modern surface, will still produce faithfully the small scene it produced in the wet clay of someone's marriage contract 3,500 years before. Adoption is a written contract on clay. A childless couple agreeing to take in a young relative will sit with their kin before a scribe. The scribe will write in the wet clay that the child will inherit as if born, that the child will in turn support the elderly couple through their old age, that any children the adopted son later has will inherit through him. In some surviving tablets, the contract goes further still. It names grandchildren not yet born, children whom the adopted son has not yet fathered, whom the adopted son has not yet even married a woman to mother, and assigns them in advance a place in the inheritance line. The grandfather in his courtyard, sealing the clay, is making a small, careful gift to a person who is, at this moment, not yet anything more than a possibility in the future. There is something almost touching about that, the very ordinary Babylonian habit of writing forward in clay into a future the writer cannot see. The renting of a donkey is a written contract on clay. A short trip, say 4 days, up the river to a small town to deliver a basket of seal stamps to a scribe there, will be marked down, the owner's name, the renter's name, the color of the donkey, the number of days, the rental fee in shekels of silver, the agreed condition of the animal on return, all on a small palm tablet. If the donkey comes back lame, the tablet specifies the penalty. If the donkey does not come back at all, the tablet specifies a higher one. The tablet is folded with both parties' seals into a small clay envelope. The envelope is sealed. The transaction has been made permanent. Brick deliveries are written contracts. A potter's order of fresh clay is written. A boatman's promise to carry 40 large jars of barley down river to the next port is written. A loan of 3 silver shekels to be repaid after the next harvest is written. The slightest small daily favor, when it crosses between non-relatives, becomes a piece of clay. This is why the surviving clay record of this period, 3,500 years later, will run into hundreds of thousands of tablets. Almost nothing has been lost, because almost everything was written, and clay once dried is one of the most patient materials in the world. Bury it, it waits. Burn it, it hardens further. Crush it, the pieces still bear their wedges. The very ordinariness of the writing is what saves it. Up the river from Babylon, a journey of about 400 miles, is the city of Mari. Mari is in this evening of the king's late reign no longer the city it was. A few short years before this night, the king's own forces moved against Mari's last great king, Zimri-Lim. The palace of Mari was burned. The fire, and this is the thing that the king sometimes lets himself remember in private in evenings like this one, the fire that burned the palace also baked into permanence the entire correspondence archive of the palace's daily life. About 20,000 cuneiform tablets packed into the palace's archive rooms were caught by the heat. Their soft clay turned into hard ceramic. The letters that Zimri-Lim wrote to the king before the war between them, letters about marriage alliances, about grain shipments, about an emissary who was a few weeks late, about a difficult son-in-law in a distant city. All of those letters are now, in this evening of the king's life, sitting in burned rooms upriver, hard as terracotta, waiting in their stacked shelves. They will be uncovered much later by other careful hands. There is something about Mesopotamian writing that arranges itself like that, to be saved by accident. The same fire that should have erased a city's daily voice fixes the voice instead, into the soil, into the strata, into the patient waiting layers under the ground. A great deal of what we will know about this city in a future the king cannot see, will come not from kept books, but from accidents, kitchens that burned, palaces that fell in war, archives that were forgotten in flooded basements, and later turned to brick by the slow heat of the soil itself. For now, in this small scribal courtyard a few streets from the workshop, the day's tablets are still damp. The two scribes finish stacking them into the cloth-lined basket. They lay another linen cloth over the top of the basket. They carry the basket gently, the way you carry a basket of sleeping kittens, into a small inner room where shelves of older, harder tablets are kept. They set the basket down on a low table. They will not bake these tablets in fire. They will simply let the night air dry them slowly by morning into permanence. Tomorrow somebody will come to collect their copy of a contract, and the clay will be ready, hard, witnessed, signed, and unalterable. In the deeper shelves of the inner room, where the older finished tablets are kept, the clay has been there long enough that the linen no longer covers most of it. The tablets, stacked, look like a small, dense library of soft gray-brown pages, each page a marriage, a sale, a dispute, a small private agreement between two families. The shelves are arranged mostly by year. The years are arranged by long custom, by the regnal year of the current king, the year of his 40th audience, the year of his 38th, the year of his second canal. The numbering is, in this way, a kind of small calendar of his long reign, made visible in clay. A boy lights a final small lamp at the edge of the courtyard. The lamp is for the watchman, who will pass through twice during the night, checking that the door to the archive is still sealed. The scribes step out into the courtyard. They look up. The first stars are out, very faint, just above the line of the courtyard wall. One of the scribes says something to the other, a domestic thing, a joke about a goat, a small remark about tomorrow's appointments. The other smiles. They walk together to the courtyard's gate. They go home. And so, while the day's small clay sleeps under its linen on the backroom shelves, in a smaller courtyard down a side street, a different kind of evening accounting is being weighed, not in clay but in silver, by men whose hands have known small bronze pans and small known stones for almost as long as the city has had a name. The smaller courtyard is behind a low wall, down a narrow lane where date palms drop their long dry fronds in the still warm dust. A single lamp hangs over its doorway. A bronze pan, the kind used for weighing small silver against a known stone, sits on the threshold table, its surface dim with use. This is not a shop in the modern sense. The city does not have shops in the modern sense, but a room where a particular man with a particular skill sees the people of his neighborhood when they need him. He is, in the local way of naming such people, the asu. We would call him, very roughly, the surgeon. He is not, this evening, in the room. His door is closed. The lamp burns above it as a courtesy and as a sign. The lamp on means the asu will return. The lamp off means the asu has gone to his country house, or has died, or has left the trade. The lamp is on tonight. He is somewhere in the city, perhaps at a patient's bedside, perhaps drinking a small cup of date wine with a friend, perhaps, at the king's invitation, at a quiet supper at the palace. He will come back before the second watch, and he will sit for a small while in the lamp's circle before going to bed. His trade this evening is one of the trades regulated by the stone in the workshop. The stone, the one being polished just a few streets away, carries among its nearly 300 rulings a small careful set of clauses about the asu. The clauses are very specific. They are also, if you read them slowly and quietly, a kind of fee schedule for the city's medicine. If a surgeon, the stone will say, opens an abscess over the eye of a wealthy man, an Willem, the full citizen of property, and the eye is saved, the surgeon shall be paid 10 shekels of silver. If the patient is a freed commoner, a man who has bought his way out of debt bondage, who lives quietly in a smaller house, who works for daily wages, the surgeon shall be paid 5 shekels. If the patient is a household slave, the slave's owner shall pay the surgeon 2 shekels. The same operation, the same risk to the surgeon, the same delicate work, with the same bronze lancet, at the same patient's same eye. The fee scales very precisely to the patient standing in the city. To a modern listener, this looks at first hearing uneven. It is also in another light simply the underlying logic of the entire society written down. Babylonian society, like very many ancient societies, was made of 3 layers, each layer with its own obligations and its own protections, each layer holding to the others by a careful set of rules. The stone in the workshop does not invent these layers, it records them in a fee. The fee in turn is a kind of safety. If you are an Ewelem, you know what your surgeon may charge you, and you know what the surgeon owes you if the operation fails. If you are a household slave, you also know. Your owner knows what your owner must pay and what the surgeon owes him if you do not survive. The clauses are not, despite their first appearance, only about silver. They are mostly about a contract being made enforceable. There is in fact a binding consequence for the surgeon if the operation goes wrong. The stone says calmly that if an Owlum loses his eye or his life under the lancet, the surgeon's hand is forfeit. The clause is 1 sentence long. The stone does not linger on it. The stone does not describe it. The stone simply states, in the same careful, even voice as the rest of the column, that the consequence exists. The surgeon, sitting in his evening lamp circle later, knows the clause as well as he knows the lines of his own palm. He has known it since he was an apprentice. He sharpens the bronze blade in the soft light very carefully. He keeps clean linen folded in a particular box. He boils his water, although he does not know the word for the small organisms in the unboiled, because his teacher's teacher said to. He has not, in 26 years of practice, taken a noble's eye. He hopes not to. He does not exactly think about the clause. He simply lives inside it, and the same logic very precisely runs through every other trade on the stone. The builder, the stone says, who builds a house so badly that it falls and kills the householder, the householder's death is set against the builder's. The boatman whose boat sinks for a fault of the boatman's own, the cargo's value, expressed in shekels, is owed back. The shepherd whose careful watch fails, whose flocks are stolen because he slept too deeply at the wrong gate, owes the count of the lost animals. The barber who shaves the marker of a slave from a slave's head when that slave's owner has not given consent. A slave was, in this city, sometimes marked by a particular style of hair at the brow, pays a fine, and forfeits his blade. Nothing in the stone, in its nearly 300 careful rulings, is metaphor. Every clause is a small unit of enforceable account. To the modern reader, this looks like a long list of laws. To the Babylonian, this is mostly a single idea, applied many times. When a man takes silver for a piece of work, the work carries a weight. If the work goes well, the silver is the fair return. If the work goes badly, the weight comes back in some form against the worker. The stone does not separate criminal law from consumer protection. The stone does not separate private contract from public order. The stone has, in this respect, a simpler structure than any later code. It is, fundamentally, the long list of what one human being owes another when the agreed exchange does not quite go the way the contract said. The surgeon's small bronze lancet, wrapped in linen on its shelf, is in this respect the cousin of the bricklayer's trowel, of the boatman's pole, of the brewer's wooden paddle, of the scribe's cut reed. Every trade has a weight against it. Every trade has a fee for it. The surgeon's small lamp continues to burn above the door. The bronze pan on the threshold continues to wait. A small grey cat, not the surgeon's, only one of the neighborhood's many small grey cats, comes around the corner of the lane, walks softly across the dust toward the threshold, considers the pan with a small careful expression, and then, finding nothing in it worth its time, settles itself on the warm stones just beside the pan. It folds its paws under its chest. It closes its eyes. The lamp burns on. The cat sleeps. A small wind, perhaps the last warm wind of the day, comes down the lane and stirs the dry fronds at the foot of the palm tree across the door. The lamp on the door shivers and then steadies. Somewhere very far away, perhaps at the river front, a long low call goes up. A barge crew calling each other in for the night. The surgeon is not back yet. The bronze pan on his threshold table still waits. There is, sitting in the back of every Babylonian surgeon's quiet thought, an older kind of clause on the stone. It is the clause about the eye and the eye, the famous one, the one that the future will, much later, hold up as the symbol of the whole stone, and, in doing so, will get most of it wrong. The clause says, very calmly, that if one man causes the loss of another man's eye, the man who caused it loses his own. The phrase by itself sounds severe to the modern ear, but the stone's full body of clauses, read carefully, says something more careful than that. The eye for eye rule applies, in its full force, only between men of the same standing. A wealthy citizen who has caused the loss of another wealthy citizen's eye carries the eye for eye consequence. A wealthy citizen who has caused the loss of a freed commoner's eye pays a fixed sum of silver. A wealthy citizen who has caused the loss of a household slave's eye pays a smaller sum to the slave's owner. The proportions are written into the stone in just the same way the surgeon's fees are. What is at first glance a strict simple rule turns out, on second look, to be a finely graded scheme of compensation by social standing. It is not the symbol the modern reader at first takes it to be. It is instead the long, careful pattern of all the other clauses on the column, a small unit of enforceable account, scaled to the standing of the parties to the exchange. The surgeon's lancet, the builder's plumb line, the boatman's pole, these are the working ends of a long, careful system, written into a single column of stone, in a single workshop, in a single evening of the king's late reign. The system itself does not feel, to the people inside it, like a system. It feels to them the way the river feels, like something that has always been there. Across the city, in fact, the small rooms and lanes are full of other rooms exactly like the surgeon's. There is, around the next corner from this lane, a small brick mason's room with the same kind of single lamp above the door, the same kind of bronze pan on the threshold. There is, 3 streets over, the carpenter's room, his door open in the warm evenings, on a small lit yard where 2 apprentices are sweeping fresh shavings into a basket. There is by the canal the boatwright's room, where a single small flat cradle holds the half-finished hull of a fishing boat, drying. Each of these rooms is regulated, in its own particular way, by a particular clause on the stone in the workshop. Each room knows its clause. Each man inside it lives, the way the surgeon does, calmly inside the clause that governs his own trade. The system is, in a small humble way, what holds the city together at this hour. The king at the palace is asleep, or nearly. The watchmen on the wharves are walking, or sitting on their low steps. The lamps in 1,000 small rooms are burning their slow, steady evening light. None of these people are, at this moment, thinking about the stone in the workshop. They do not need to. The stone is there. The clauses are written. The system is, very quietly, doing the small work of being the city's underlying order, the way the river is doing the work of being water. And so far beyond this single quiet door, where one man's lamp marks one man's small place in the city's larger order, the wider business of the city is closing up its own ledgers, the boats coming in, the canals settling into their darker hours, the day's weights of grain and silver being put away, out under the long open sky of the river front, where the evening is now beginning to settle into its slower, broader rhythm. The river runs north to south along the eastern flank of the city, broad and slow, marked in long ribbons of lamplight, where the boatmen have tied up for the night. The Euphrates does not roar, it murmurs, in a low constant voice that the city's people have heard every evening from the day they were small enough to be carried on a hip. Children fall asleep to it. Old men, at the end of their lives, listen for it. The boats are now mostly in, their masts down for the dock, their crews squatting on small flat decks, eating bread with onion and cured fish, or playing a slow, careful game of stones on a wooden board. At one of the lower wharves, just by where the canal bends out of the main course, a small, thick-walled building stands. Its door is open. A lamp is on inside. This is one of the city's neighborhood lending houses, not a temple, although temples lend silver too, but a private operation run by a family that has been in the business of lending barley and silver to its neighbors for 3 generations. The man at the table inside is a clerk, not a moneylender. His master, the moneylender, has gone home. The clerk is finishing the day's small entries. He has in front of him a stack of palm-sized clay tablets, each one inscribed with a small debt. He is putting them away in a particular careful order. By the month they fall due. He is not in a hurry. The night will hold him here for another hour. He has the company of his lamp and of the low river. The way debt works in this city is direct. A man in the early summer runs short of barley. Maybe his small plot of land has been a little less generous this year than the year before. Maybe his daughter's bride price has been higher than he planned. Maybe his cartwheel has cracked and the wheelwright has been more expensive than he expected. He comes, in early summer, to a lending house like this one. He asks for, say, 10 silver shekels, or equivalently 2 large measures of barley. He is given the silver or the barley, or some agreed mix of the two. A small clay tablet is written. He owes this amount, plus a stated rate of interest, to be repaid after the next harvest. The tablet is sealed by his own cylinder seal pressed at the rim. It is also signed by 3 witnesses, who press their seals beside his. The tablet goes onto a shelf in this lending house. When the harvest comes, when the next round of barley comes in from his small plot, in the autumn, he comes back, bringing the silver, or the barley, or some agreed mix. The clerk weighs out the repayment in his bronze pan against the lending house's known stones. The debt is closed. The tablet is taken down off the shelf, and then, with great care, the clerk breaks the tablet. He does not throw it away. He breaks it deliberately with one firm strike of a small wooden mallet. The wedge marks on its surface, the man's name, the seal of the witnesses, the amount, the rate, snap apart into 3 or 4 fragments. The man, who has come to repay the debt, sometimes likes to do this himself. Some lending houses have a small wooden mallet kept on a low shelf for exactly this purpose, and the man, when his debt has been measured out and accepted, is invited to take the mallet and break the tablet himself. It is not a violent act. It is, in fact, a small ceremony, almost a quiet release. Cancellation is in this city tactile. You can hear it, you can feel it in your hand, the small dry breaking of the clay that morning was the public record of what you owed. The fragments of the broken tablet are swept into a small basket. The basket, at the end of the year, is taken out and buried in a corner of the lending house's courtyard, where the clay returns very slowly to the riverbank, from which, in another year, it came. The moneylender, the master of this house, who has gone home for the evening, is a man in his late 50s, the 3rd of 3 generations in the trade. His grandfather started the business with a small wooden chest of borrowed silver, lent out in small portions to the immediate neighbors in a single back room of a small house just a few streets from where this lending house now stands. His grandfather had been before that a barley merchant on a flatboat. The lending business began, in the family's quiet telling of itself, as a way of making the silver that lay idle between trips up and down the river earn a small return. The grandfather's son, the lender's father, moved the business into the building it now occupies. The lender's father added the second room, in which the day's tablets are stored, the small bronze pans, and the careful set of known stones, which sit on a high shelf, were chosen personally by the lender's father over many years of attention. The lender, who has now run the business for almost 3 decades, has kept it small on purpose. He has not opened branch offices in other neighborhoods. He has not lent beyond a certain ceiling of silver to any one debtor. He has the patient, careful, slightly cautious manner of a man who has watched his father refuse 2 large loans that, with the benefit of hindsight, were obviously going to fail. He has, in his 3 decades, lost almost no silver to bad debt. He attributes this, when his wife asks him about it over supper, to his father's old habit of asking each potential borrower in detail about the borrower's mother. The clerk in the lending house tonight is, in a small way, a part of this same long family practice. He is the lender's nephew. He has, since boyhood, sat in this same small room on summer evenings watching his uncle and his uncle's father weigh out small silver. He knows by feel the difference between a freshly cast small ingot and a worn old one. He knows how the bronze pan rocks slightly more on its leather hinge when the silver is being measured against barley. He knows the way his uncle's grandfather's known stones, the heavy round one, the small flat one, the careful tiny one for high-value transactions, sit in their old shaped grooves on the high shelf. He has, in his own quiet way, accepted that he will run this business in turn 20 years from now, when his uncle finally lets him. This evening, however, his uncle's quiet rules are still in force. The clerk is finishing the day's small entries, one by one, by the calm patience of a single oil lamp. Not every debt is repaid that simply, of course. Some years are not generous. Some plots of land, after 2 seasons of poor harvest, do not yield enough to cover what was borrowed. Some debtors fall further behind, and when that happens, when a man cannot repay, when his small plot will not generate enough barley to clear his account, the stone in the workshop has, as in everything else, a careful clause. The clause is one of the gentler ones on the stone. A man, the stone says, who has been seized by financial trouble, who has had to sell his wife, or his son, or his daughter to a creditor, or who has himself entered the household of his creditor as a servant, shall work in that household for 3 years. In the 4th year, the stone says, freedom shall be established. After 3 years of labor, the debt is considered settled. The grain that the wife has ground in the creditor's kitchen, the brick that the son has carried in the creditor's yard, the daughter's hours of spinning at the creditor's loom, are counted as the equivalent of what was owed. No matter the size of the original debt, the count runs out at 3 years. In the 4th year, the family returns home. That is the line, about 120 wedges in cuneiform, that the king has, on the long quiet evenings of the past 2 years, sometimes read aloud to himself by his own lamp. It is not the most famous line on the stone. It will not be the line the future will most often quote, but it is a line he is, in a small private way, glad about. There is in the everyday life of this city a soft set of customs that have grown up around the 3-year rule. A family that has fallen into debt service is invited by the household that has taken them in to bring a small token of their own household with them, a particular cooking pot, a particular small carved figure of a household god, a particular blanket. These tokens, by old habit, are kept on a shelf in the creditor's home, untouched all 3 years. On the day the family returns home, the tokens are wrapped and handed back, the way a friend returns a borrowed book. The custom is not on the stone. The custom is older than the stone. The stone simply protects the underlying pattern. The clerk in the lending house, sealing the last of his tablets for the night, has dealt with 2 such families this season. One was redeemed early by the wife's brother, who came in from a small town upriver with the silver to pay off the debt directly. The other is at this moment working out the last 6 months of its 3 years in the household of an olive merchant on the southern edge of the city. They will go home in the spring. The clerk slides the last tablet into its slot on the shelf. He stands, he stretches his back, he blows on the wick of the lamp until the flame slims down to a small careful point. He goes to the doorway. The river just outside is very dark and very quiet. He stands for a moment looking at it. He can see in the night the small floating lamps of 2 boats moored a little way down river, and the dimmer single lamp on the watchman's tower at the canal mouth. The river itself is, as it always is, a slow, steady murmur in the air. He shuts the door of the lending house behind him. He turns the small wooden bolt. He walks up the riverside path, toward his own neighborhood, toward his own small house, toward his own warm supper, and his own waiting wife. The river keeps him company for the first part of his walk. And so, while the lending houses along the wharf settle into the quiet of their kept records and their broken tablets, in a different room far back from the river, in a small lamplit study within the palace itself, a single tall man is, at this very hour, sitting alone at a low table, going slowly through a small stack of letters that have been brought to him this evening. The palace at night is not, the way later imagination will sometimes paint it, a place of golden halls and high torches and clashing courtiers. The palace at night is a series of small clean rooms, mostly empty of people now, with thick mud brick walls that keep the day's warmth a little longer than the courtyards outside. The corridors are dim. A single guard sometimes walks the length of one, then turns and walks back. Most of the household at this hour is asleep, or eating quietly in their own quarters, or doing whatever quiet things people do in the small hours of an early summer night when the day's audiences are done. In one of the inner rooms, behind a heavy carved door that has been left ajar, the king does not like a closed door at night. A single lamp is burning. A low table stands in the center of the room. The king sits at it, not on the formal throne chair, but on a simple stool, the way an older man sits when he is tired in the lower back. A second stool is empty beside him, where a chief scribe usually sits in the days but does not, at this hour, need to be. The chief scribe has gone home. On the table is a small leather pouch. Inside the pouch, and beside it, on the table partly slid out, is a small stack of clay tablets. The clay is dry. The tablets have come from various directions over the past several days, brought in by messengers in the late afternoons. They have been waiting on this table for the king to make a small private hour for them. He has made the hour. He often does. The first tablet on the top of the stack is from the governor of a town on the southern canal. The governor writes, addressing the king by his usual long royal title, then dropping, after the formalities, into a calm administrative voice that the canal has this season silted up at a particular bend where it joins a smaller waterway, and that the local labor will not be enough to clear it before the next planting, and that he is asking, with respect, that the king either send a small additional crew from a nearby town or grant a temporary delay in the obligation to deliver a fixed measure of grain to the central storehouse, since the silted canal is at the moment slowing the boats. The king reads the letter twice. He nods slightly. He sets the tablet face down on the small empty space on the table to his left, the side where he keeps the to-be-answered tomorrow pile. He will dictate a reply in the morning, calmly. Send the small crew. Do not delay the grain. The planting must hold. The second tablet is from a chief priest in a temple a day's journey to the north. It concerns in some careful detail an irregularity in the city's lunar calendar, a missing day, or rather a small disagreement between two different methods of marking the new moon. The matter is technical. It is also in its quiet way the kind of matter that determines when a temple festival is held, which in turn determines when a great many other small economic events happen in the surrounding farmland. The king reads through it slowly. The calendar question is one he has been involved in off and on for many years. He has at one point in his reign ordered a correction to the lunar count, the kind of decision that in another civilization would be written into history books as a great calendar reform, but that in his own city is recorded simply on tablets very like the one he is now holding, as a quiet administrative ruling. He sets this tablet down on the right side of the table, the side for answer this evening. He will, before he sleeps, mark out a small reply. The third tablet is shorter. It is from a small village whose name the king does not, at first, recognize. The village's headman writes, through a regional scribe, in slightly clumsy spelling, that a particular pack donkey, on loan from a neighbor for the carrying of date fruit out to a small caravan, has not returned. The donkey is described in some detail. The donkey is grey, with a small white patch on the left flank. The donkey answers to a particular sound. The headman wishes to ask the king's officials in the wider region to keep an eye out for the donkey, in case it has perhaps found its way into a market, or been taken in as stray by another farmer. The king reads this tablet too, with the same patient attention. He smiles, very slightly, at the careful description of the white patch. He sets the tablet aside on the right of the table. He will pass it in the morning to the appropriate regional officer with a small note that the matter is to be taken seriously, the way every small matter is to be taken seriously. There is, in fact, a fourth small tablet on the stack tonight, that the king has not yet picked up. It is a short report from a regional officer in a country town about a slow-paying provincial tax collector. The officer writes, with no particular drama, that the tax collector, a man the regional officer has known for many years, has, this quarter, been late in delivering his collected silver to the central storehouse. The officer is asking, in the discreet voice these letters use, whether the king wishes the matter to be looked into directly, or whether the regional officer should, on his own authority, make a private visit to the tax collector first, and find out gently what the trouble is. The king will read this one too, slowly, in a moment. He will almost certainly write back instructing the regional officer to make the private visit first. The king has, over 42 years on the throne, learned that most provincial slowness, when its underlying cause is asked about politely, turns out to be a sick wife, a flooded canal, a son in trouble, a small accident with a granary. It rarely turns out to be theft. The king's habit is to assume, until the regional officer's private visit returns the news to the contrary, that the provincial slowness is a small private grief, not a small private crime. There is in the room with him an even older small pouch on a low shelf by the wall. He has not this evening opened it. It holds perhaps 20 old copies of small rulings he gave in his first decade on the throne, when he was still a young man, small adjudications of disputed plots of orchard land between cousins, of inheritance shares in small country households, of small disagreements over the placement of a boundary stone between two neighboring fields. He has not looked at most of these in many years. He still remembers very vaguely the names of some of the people. He still remembers, very dimly, the small comfortable feeling of having found, after several days of consideration, a ruling that the two parties, when it was read to them by a regional scribe, both accepted without further complaint. It is one of the small private satisfactions of his long reign. The pouch on the shelf holds them, quietly, the way some men keep their favorite small carved cylinder seals. This is, in fact, the texture of the more than 50 letters that survive, in the king's own name, into the centuries far beyond this one. They are not letters about glory. They are letters about canals, about calendars, about a runaway donkey, about a slow-paying provincial official, about the proper way to assess a small disputed plot of orchard land at the edge of a country town. The empire, in the king's voice, runs on small attention. It runs on his willingness, at 60 years old, to sit at a low table at the end of a long day and read, one by one, the small administrative tablets of small administrative places, and to give each of them, donkey, canal, calendar, the same quiet seriousness. He picks up a fourth tablet. This one is older. It is not from this week. He has brought it out of the back of the pouch on purpose this evening. He keeps it, with one or two others like it, as a kind of reminder. It is a copy of a letter he himself sent, some years ago, many years ago by now, to a regional officer after the last large war. The war had been against the king of Larsa in the south. The war had been long. It had ended in the end with the king's own troops taking the southern city. But the larger problem after a war like that is not the war's end. It is the displaced population. Whole villages along the canals between Babylon and Larsa had been emptied. The fields lay fallow. The smaller waterways had begun, in some places, to silt back into the surrounding land. The letter, which the king is now holding in his hand in its old, slightly chipped copy, concerns the rebuilding of one such waterway, the western branch of the river. In the king's own voice, addressed to the regional officer, it instructs that the canal be cleared, that the dikes be repaired, that the small towns along its course be invited to send back the families that had fled them, that grain and seed stock be made available for the first replanting, and that the temple in the largest town be repaired enough to draw the priests back. The letter is, on its face, an engineering instruction. Underneath, in its quiet way, it is the king's habit of mind. Where there has been a war, you put the land back together first. The politics follow. He had been about 48 years old when he wrote it. He is older now. He still thinks the same way. He sets the older copy down on the table for a moment. He looks at the lamp. The lamp's flame is steady. The room is very quiet. From the courtyard, just at the edge of hearing, comes the small sound of a single date palm's fronds being moved by a soft current of air. From much further away, on the other side of the palace walls, comes the faintest possible murmur of the river, too faint to be heard with any certainty, but heard in the way old rivers are heard by anyone who has lived a long life near one. The king lifts the older tablet again, very gently, with both hands, and slides it back into the leather pouch. He pulls the small pouch back over toward his side of the table. He picks up the next of the new tablets. It is this one, about a slow-paying official in a town near the eastern marshes. The king begins to read. He will be at this table, with this small stack, for perhaps another hour. The single lamp will keep him company. He will not call for a second lamp. He prefers a single lamp at this hour. He has for a long time now preferred a single lamp. And so, while the king reads his evening letters by the one steady light, in courtyards across the wider city, smaller lamps are being tended by other hands, by women in domestic kitchens, by brewers at their wide clay vats, by children half asleep at the edges of family yards, and the city carries forward into the deeper evening on those many small soft fires. Up a narrow lane that runs between two long rows of mud brick houses, set back behind a small open courtyard with a young date palm at its center, there is a wide soft-walled room with no door, only a long reed mat hung from the lintel, drawn back in the warm evenings. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of warm bread and the slow, sour, sweet smell of fermenting barley. This is one of the city's neighborhood breweries. Like many breweries in this city, it is in a private courtyard. Like most breweries in this city, it is being run at this hour by women. The brewery is not, in the Babylonian way of thinking, a separate industrial place. It is the back kitchen of a household. The family lives in the front rooms. The brewing happens in the back court. The day's beer, when it is ready, is shared between the family's own table and the small neighborhood of buyers who come to the courtyard with their own jugs in the late afternoons. The woman at the wide clay vat tonight has been making beer in this courtyard for 23 years. She learned it from her mother. Her mother learned it from her own mother. Her mother's mother had learned it, very probably in this same courtyard, a generation earlier still. The vat at the center of the room is the same vat the woman has known since she was a child playing on the courtyard's edge. The wooden paddle she uses to stir it is the same paddle she watched her mother lean upon, older now, smoother at the grip, but still the same piece of palm wood, still cut by her grandmother's husband from a tree that fell in the year of the great storm. She is this evening working the day's second batch. Her daughter, 20 years old, is with her. Her daughter is, in the manner of all daughters in this trade, learning by being there. They are not exactly quiet as they work. They sing. What they sing is the hymn to Ninkasi. Ninkasi is the goddess of brewing. She is, in the city's old understanding, the patron of every wide clay vat in every neighborhood courtyard. The hymn to her, taught from mother to daughter, sung over the slow, steady steps of the day's brewing, is, in its plain practical body, not so much a prayer as it is a recipe. The hymn moves through the steps of the brewing, in order, line by line. Ninkasi, the singer says, you who soak the malt in a jar. Ninkasi, you who spread the cooked mash on great reed mats. Ninkasi, you who hold the sweet wort with 2 hands. Ninkasi, you who pour out the filtered beer of the collector vat. Each line of the hymn corresponds very precisely to a particular gesture the brewer makes with her hands. The hymn is, in a quiet way, both worship and an instruction manual. A young woman who has not yet brewed her first batch has only to listen to her mother sing the hymn through 2 or 3 times while watching her mother's hands to know by the end how to make beer. That is the small surprise of the Babylonian way. The recipe is the song is the prayer is the work. There is no clear seam between them. The woman at the vat is this evening working slowly. Her daughter is helping with the smaller jobs. The smaller jobs are lifting a clean linen filter cloth from a folded stack, setting it across the rim of a smaller pot, ladling the warm wort very gently through the cloth so that the husks and the heavier yeast settle out, gathering the spent grain into a wide flat basket that will be carried at the end of the night to the neighbor's pen of 2 black goats who will eat the warm grain in the morning with great seriousness and contentment. The smaller children of the household, 3 of them, 2 boys and a small girl, sit on the courtyard's edge, half asleep on a folded sack, their bare feet tucked under them. A black and white kitten naps on the corner of the sack. The girl, who is perhaps 4, is leaning very gently against her older brother's shoulder. The brothers, 8 and 10, are watching the work without really watching it, the way children at this hour watch anything that happens to be in the room. The hymn moves on. The woman's voice is low. Her daughter's voice, just under hers, is a small clear thread. They are not singing for an audience. They are singing in the way the work is sung. In the corner of the courtyard, on a low table, sits a single wide pot, taller than the vat at the center, half full of an earlier batch. 3 long reed straws lean out of the pot's mouth, slim and pale in the lamplight. This is the way beer is drunk in this city. The brew fresh from the vat is not finely strained. Small bits of husk and yeast float on its surface. To drink it from the lip of the pot would mean drinking through those bits. The Babylonians, very long ago, solved this small inconvenience elegantly. They cut hollow reeds from the riverbank, and they drink the beer through the reeds. A single drinker uses a single short straw. Several drinkers, sharing a wide pot, use longer straws, sometimes very long, 3 or 4 feet long, each one descending past the floating foam into the cleaner liquid below. You can imagine the small cylinder seal, found far in the future in a temple basement somewhere, that will show this scene. Several seated figures leaning forward, each with their own slim straw, all reaching into one large pot at the center of a low table. The figures will be wearing the long fringed robes of their century. The pot will be carefully drawn. The whole image will be perhaps no bigger across than a person's thumbnail. The future will look at it for centuries and find, in its small carved figures, something almost familiar, something that says very gently, across 3,600 years, that people in any age do gather, they do share, they do lean toward one another over a single thing on a low table, and they do, softly, slowly, in the warm air of an early summer evening, talk in low voices about the small things of their day. This evening, however, the pot at the corner is for the household alone. A neighbor's husband will come in an hour to share it with the household's eldest son. They will sit on the low stools by the pot. They will lift the long straws. They will talk, perhaps, about the goats, perhaps about the weather, perhaps about a small expected marriage in the family of an aunt. The hymn in the center of the courtyard will continue very softly into its later verses, the steps that come after the filtering, the steps that come at the very end of the brewing, the steps that look, in the carving of a thumbnail seal, like nothing more than 2 women bending toward each other over a wide clay vat in the lamplight of a quiet domestic yard. The youngest child against her brother's shoulder is asleep now. The kitten is asleep. The lamps on the courtyard's edge burn their slow yellow light. The smell of the wort is, in this hour, the same smell, almost exactly, as the smell of warm bread. The hymn continues, in the warm evening, into its later verses. Ninkasi, the singer says, you who hold the wide vessel with both arms. Ninkasi, you who place the great fermenting jars on a base. Ninkasi, you who pour the filtered beer from the collector vat. It is like the onrush of the Tigris and the Euphrates. Each line of the hymn in this section names a step in the brewing that comes after the filtering. Each line, like the earlier verses, corresponds to a small gesture by the brewer's hands. The hymn is, in its careful order, both the recipe for tomorrow's first batch and the prayer that thanks the goddess for today's. There is no clear seam between them. Beyond the hymn, in the soft, warm air of the courtyard, there are smaller songs. The woman's daughter, between verses of the main hymn, hums a very short, small fragment of a different older song, a child's song her own grandmother taught her many years ago on a courtyard's edge, about a small goat that wandered into a barley field and got lost. The fragment is 6 notes long. It does not have words now. The daughter does not know exactly where she learnt it. It rises sometimes very softly between the slow stirs of the paddle, the way a small breath of warmer air rises off a brazier between movements of the night wind. The cylinder seal that will in the very far future be found in the basement of a forgotten temple, and that will show beer drinking with the long reed straws, will be by some lucky accident dated to almost exactly this period. The figures on it will be wearing exactly the kind of fringed robes the woman in this courtyard wears tonight. The pot on it will be exactly the kind of wide collector pot in the corner of this courtyard. The straws will be drawn at exactly the angle of the 3 slim reeds leaning out of the pot beside the low table. The seal will be perhaps the size of half a thumb. It will in a future museum sit in a glass drawer very far from this courtyard, with a small printed card beside it. The card will explain in a few short paragraphs what the scene shows. The card will not be able to convey, it cannot, the smell of warm bread and fermenting barley, and the soft murmur of the older woman's voice singing under her daughter's voice, all in one small, quiet, patient yard, on a single late spring evening in the last decade of a long-reigning king's life. The neighbor's husband will arrive soon to share the wide pot at the corner. The 2 boys, 8 and 10, will be sent off to their sleeping mats just inside the front rooms of the house. The little girl, asleep against her brother's shoulder, will be carried in by her mother, who will lay her down very gently, fold a thin blanket over her, and return to the courtyard to finish the day's work. The hymn will continue, the paddle will continue, the lamps will continue, the smell of the wort and the warm bread will continue, the kitten will sleep on, undisturbed, in its corner of the folded sack, and so, with the hymn folding itself into the slow stir of the paddle, and the children asleep in their corner of the courtyard, and the long reed straws waiting on the low table by the pot, let us, very softly, leave this small warm courtyard and go out once more to where the river is keeping its slow constant watch along the eastern edge of the city. The riverside path is quiet now. The last barges have come in. Their tall masts have been let down onto their flat decks for the night. The coiled ropes are coiled. The water, very dark, runs slowly past, the way it always does, the way it has done every evening of every season since long before the city was first built. The Euphrates does not know that there is a city beside it. It simply runs. A small line of lamps marks the wharf. The lamps are set, one to each boat, in iron holders fixed into the wooden uprights of the dock. Each lamp burns very steadily in the still air. The lamps are reflected in the river's dark surface as long, slow ribbons of light, drawn out, then folded back upon themselves where the current moves. If you stood at the edge of the wharf and looked straight down, you would see your own face, very dimly, and behind it, the long reflected light of the lamp above your shoulder, and behind that, nothing, only the slow, steady dark of the river going about its business. The river, this season, is low. The flood of the late winter has long since passed. The next flood will not come until the snows of the high northern mountains begin to melt in the months to come. For now, the river is patient, slow, a soft, low murmur in the wider air. A watchman walks the wharf. He is wearing a plain robe and carrying a small lamp of his own. He stops at each of the docked boats. He listens briefly at each. He does not need to listen long. He is checking, in the old habit of the city's nightly watch, that each boat is properly tied. He moves on. The lamp at the next boat throws his shadow forward, then back, as he walks. A few streets back from the wharf, in the small inner courtyards of the scribal quarter, the day's clay tablets are still drying under their linen cloths. By morning they will be hard. The clerks who pressed them this afternoon are now home with their own families. The lamps in the scribal courtyards are dark. The shelves wait, in the careful order of the day, for tomorrow's pickups. Further inward still, the workshop where the dark stone is being polished is also closed for the night. The polishers have set down their soft cloths and their river sand. The 2 lamps that burned there earlier have been carefully snuffed. The stone, half finished, stands in its low wooden cradle in the dark room. It cannot be seen in the darkness, but it is there. It is waiting very quietly for the morning, when the polishers will come back with new lamps and new cloths and continue the slow, patient work of bringing the surface to its final deep darkness. Somewhere further still, in one of the brewery courtyards, a few streets inward from the wharf, the wide clay vat has been covered with a linen cloth for the night. The reed straws have been set in their bundle on a low shelf. The hymn that was being sung this evening has finished. The children who fell asleep at the edge of the courtyard have been carried by their mother gently to their sleeping mats inside the front rooms of the house. The kitten has gone wherever kittens go in the small dark hours. The watchman at the far end of the wharf lifts his lamp briefly and calls, softly, the way watchmen call in this city, not a shout, only a low single word that carries the second hour. The hour is acknowledged from somewhere across the canal by another watchman's lower distant answer. The watch is even tonight. There is nothing to report. Near the watchman's lamp, on the deck of one of the smaller barges, the crew has banked a very small fire in a low clay brazier. The fire is for warmth, not for cooking. Supper was finished hours ago, and for the soft company that a flame gives to 4 men sitting in the open air at the end of a long day on the water. The men sit cross-legged. They are speaking very softly to each other. Their words do not carry to the wharf. Their faces are warmed in small steady ovals by the braziers' glow. One of them, the youngest, is holding a small reed flute. He is not playing it. He is only turning it slowly in his hands. Later in the night, perhaps, he will play a few quiet notes. For now the flute is a small private object in his palms. The smell on the air, here at the wharf, is a particular blend of river mud, of pitch from the boat's caulking, of wood smoke from the small brazier, of the wet rope at the mooring rings. It is to anyone who has lived near this river the smell of a quiet boat at night. It is older than the city. It is older than the king. It is, in some quiet way, the smell of every evening the people of this part of the world have ever spent on this water. Far across the canal, on the other wharf, the smaller, older wharf where the temple's grain boats are usually moored, A second watchman is, at almost exactly this moment, walking his own line of lamps. He is too far away to see clearly from this side. He is only, in the deeper darkness across the water, a small, slow shape with a small, slow lamp. The two watchmen have known each other for many years. They have a small shared signal, a particular sequence of 2 short calls that they use every night at the change of the second hour to confirm to each other that the night is even. The signal has just been given. The answer has just been received. Both watchmen on their 2 wharves have settled briefly into the small quiet between the second and the third hours, when the watch is steady and there is nothing more for a long stretch to do. The bargemen on the small barge with the brazier have stopped talking. One of them is now leaning back against the low rail of the boat, looking up at the night sky. Another is dozing, with his chin on his folded arms. A third is poking very gently at the brazier with a small stick, keeping the flame even. The fourth, the youngest, with the reed flute, has, without quite meaning to, begun to play. The notes are very few, 5 notes, then a pause, 5 notes again in a slightly different order. The sound carries across the calm water of the wharf, very softly, to the watchman on the wharf-master's side. The watchman does not look up. He has heard in his 30 years on this wharf every small evening tune that a young bargeman has ever played in a quiet hour on a quiet night. The young man's tune fades. He stops. He sets the flute down on the deck beside him. He lies back, with his head on a small folded jacket, and looks up at the same sky. The date palms on the canal's far side stand in their long, careful rows. They were planted generations ago by a coordinated effort of 3 neighboring temples. Each temple owns its own section of the orchard, marked in the old way by small carved boundary stones at the corners. The boundary stones are not the kind of stone the workshop is polishing tonight. They are smaller, rougher, more local, pieces of grey-brown limestone or sandstone scratched on their upper face with the simple cuneiform marks that name the owning temple. A boundary stone, properly set, lasts about 100 years before the script on it begins to be hard to read. The temples, every century or so, send out a small careful crew to recut the boundary marks. The work is humble. The work is the riverside version of what the polishers, a few streets inland, are doing on the King's Stone. The line of the wharf bends, here where the canal joins the main course of the river. A small footbridge, wooden, narrow, only just wide enough for 1 man with a basket, crosses the canal. The footbridge has a single lamp at its center. The lamp's reflection in the dark canal water is, in the still air, almost perfectly steady, a small round dot of yellow doubled by the water. On the other side of the canal, the date palms begin. They line the path for a long distance, marching out southward along the wider water. The palms are very still tonight. The smaller fronds at their lower edges sometimes move very slightly in the air that drifts up from the river, but the larger fronds at the top are still. The palms have stood here for years. Some of them have stood here for the whole of the king's reign. A few of them, by the southern edge of the orchard, were already old trees when the king first came to the throne 42 years ago. You can hear very faintly from somewhere deep inside the orchard the slow, steady tick of a single date pit falling from a ripe cluster, hitting a frond, then dropping further to the ground. The sound is so soft that if you were not already listening for the river, you would not hear it at all. The river behind it is the louder voice. The pit against the frond, against the ground, is the smaller. Together they make, for one short moment, a small two-note evening rhythm, and then both fall back into silence. A small flat boat, moored at the canal's edge, rocks very slightly as a soft current passes under it. The rope holding it to the iron ring of the wharf is taut and slack and taut again in the small steady rhythm of the water. Inside the boat, under a folded length of brown linen, the day's catch, 6 or 7 river fish, has been carefully set out in a flat basket for the morning's market. The fish will not be brought to market by the man who caught them. They will be picked up before sunrise by the man's wife, who will carry them in the basket up the southern road into the city's main market square and set them out on a flat reed mat for the morning's customers. The watchman on the wharf reaches the far end. He turns and starts to walk back. His shadow goes ahead of him now. The line of the lamps along the wharf draws him along. Somewhere far inside the city, in the inner courtyards of the palace itself, the king has by now finished his small stack of evening letters. The lamp at his low table has been carefully turned down. He has gone perhaps to his sleeping chamber. We cannot quite see him from here. He is somewhere in the dark of those inner rooms. He is, very probably, almost asleep. The river continues its slow, steady murmur. The lamps along the wharf burn their unhurried light. The watchman walks. The boats sleep at their moorings. The reed straws on their shelf in the brewery courtyard wait for tomorrow's beer. The clay tablets on their drying shelves in the scribal courtyards wait for tomorrow's pickups. The dark stone in its workshop waits for tomorrow's polishing. And so, with the wharf settling into the long quiet of its second hour, and the river keeping its slow, steady promise to be there tomorrow, and the lamps burning their patient yellow at the edge of the water, let us turn very softly, very slowly, very gently back inward toward the workshop and the palace, where the last few lights of this evening are now beginning to be put away for the night. The last of the lamps along the wharf is being trimmed for the second time of the night. The watchman has finished his second long walk. He is gone to sit briefly on the low wooden step at the wharf-master's small shed. He will be there half resting until the next round. The boats are quiet. The river runs. The night is settling into its deeper hours. A few streets inward, the small workshop where the dark stone has been polished today stands in its full darkness. Both lamps have been carefully snuffed. The polishers are at home. The doorway is closed, with a simple wooden bar slid across from the inside, and a small inner watchman, a young apprentice who sleeps by long custom on a folded mat just inside the door, has settled himself for the night. He is breathing slowly. The stone in its low wooden cradle is in the dark. You cannot see the stone. The room has no lamp now, but the stone is there. It is waiting. The polish on its lower portion is, by now, nearly complete. The higher portion still carries the small unfinished roughness that the polishers will return to in the morning. The carved figures at its top, the king, the seated sun god, the small flames at the god's shoulders, the slim rod and the small coiled rope, are in the dark with the rest. They wait with the rest. They will be there in the morning. They will be there in a year. They will be there somewhere in the world for the rest of recorded time. In the palace, in the inner rooms behind the audience halls, the king has gone to his sleeping chamber. His lamp at the small writing table has been turned down. He has set the small leather pouch of letters back into its place in a low wooden cabinet. He has crossed the dark corridor, gone past a single waiting servant who has nodded to him and stepped aside and entered his own room. The room is, like the rest of the palace at this hour, very simple. A low bed, a folded linen sheet, a small lamp on a low shelf by the wall, a single window that looks out narrowly toward the inner palace garden. He is lain down on the bed. He has pulled the linen sheet very gently over himself. He is on his right side, facing away from the lamp. The lamp is burning very low, almost down to its wick. He is not at this moment quite asleep. He is in the small soft quiet that comes just before sleep. He is in this small soft quiet, thinking about almost nothing. He is thinking perhaps of the shape of the half-finished stone, the dark wet ribbon of light he saw on its flank earlier this evening. He is thinking perhaps of the small white patch on the runaway donkey in the headman's letter. He is thinking perhaps of the line on the stone about the family that returns home in the 4th year. He is not thinking of anything in particular. The thoughts pass through him very softly, the way the river outside the palace is passing very softly past the wharf. The lamp in his room finishes its slow wick. The flame thins, hesitates, then settles into the smallest possible bead of light, then goes out. The room is in full darkness now. He is by now asleep. Outside the palace walls, in the wider sleeping city, the texture of the dark is everywhere a little different. In the scribal quarter, the courtyards smell very faintly of damp clay. The shelves in the back rooms are slowly cooling. The day's last small tablets, the marriage contract for a young couple from a town upriver, the donkey rental for a 4-day journey to the south, the long, careful adoption agreement for a childless family that has finally found the boy they will raise as their own. These tablets are setting into permanence, very slowly, under their linen, in the lending house by the wharf. The day's last broken tablets lie in their small basket. The fragments will be carried, at the end of the season, to the buried corner of the courtyard where the clay returns to the earth. For now they wait. The lending house's door is bolted. The clerk is at home in his own sleeping room with his own warm wife. In the surgery room behind the date palms in its narrow lane, the Asu has returned. He has come back, as he always does, just before the 2nd hour. He has sat for a small while in the lamp's circle. He has eaten a small piece of bread and a small cup of date wine. He has, before going to his sleeping chamber, looked once at the small bronze pan on the threshold table, and he has nodded to himself, the way he always does at this hour. His lamp is now snuffed. He is asleep. The pan on the threshold waits in the dark. In the brewery courtyards, the wide clay vats are covered. The reed straws in their bundles on the low shelves are quiet. The kittens, 3 small kittens, one black and white, one entirely grey, are curled in 3 different corners of 3 different courtyards, fast asleep. The hymn to Ninkasi, sung this evening by the woman and her daughter, has long since finished. The hymn will be sung again tomorrow evening by the same 2 voices, in the same courtyard, in the same warm air. For now the hymn is in the women's sleeping minds, the way an old song is always in the back of the singer's mind. In the small flat boat at the canal's edge, the basket of river fish for the morning's market is still under its folded length of brown linen. The fish are still. The basket is still. The boat rocks very gently, almost imperceptibly, on the slow current. The man who caught the fish is asleep in his small house up the southern road. His wife, who will carry the fish to market before sunrise, is asleep beside him. They have, between them, an old understanding about the small alarm that will pull her up an hour before dawn. The alarm is not a bell. The alarm is the slow internal clock of a woman who has done this work every day for the whole of her adult life. In the small back room shelves of the scribal courtyards, the linen cloths covering the day's drying tablets stir, very slightly, in a small movement of cool night air that comes in under the courtyard door. The wedges in the wet clay, very gradually, are setting into permanence. By the time the first grey light comes, in some hours from now, the tablets will be hard. The marriage contract, the donkey rental, the adoption agreement, each of them by morning will be unalterable. Each of them by morning will be a small permanent piece of clay record that a family, a household, a craftsman, will collect at some point in the morning hours and carry home to their own private archive. In the surgery room, the bronze pan on the threshold table reflects, very faintly, the dim light from a single small lamp burning in a courtyard 2 doors down. The reflection is the size of a fingertip. The pan is otherwise dark. The surgeon's bronze lancet, wrapped in clean linen on its shelf inside the room, is in the dark with everything else. The lancet has been used in the surgeon's 26 years of practice, perhaps 200 times. It is in the soft, confident way of a long-used good tool, a small, reliable, familiar piece of metal. The surgeon will pick it up again, perhaps in 2 days, when an elderly neighbor with a small stubborn abscess on his lower jaw is due to come to the lamplit room for an evening procedure. For now the lancet rests. The wrappings of clean linen rest. The surgeon, asleep 2 rooms back from his lamplit consulting room, rests. In the brewery courtyards, the wide clay vats, covered for the night, are still very faintly warm at their lower walls from the day's brewing. The warm spent grain that has been gathered for the goats has been set in its wide flat basket on the small narrow stone bench beside the courtyard gate, where the goats will find it at first light. The grain is calm. The basket is calm. The night around the basket is calm. The date palms by the canal are quiet. A single date pit, somewhere far inside the orchard, falls. The sound is so soft that no one hears it. The pit settles into the dust at the foot of its tree. It will, in the slow, patient way of seeds, perhaps put up a small first shoot in the warming weeks to come. The river continues. The wharf is quiet. The palms are still. The line of lamps along the wharf, one by one, has gone out. The very last lamp, the watchman's own small lamp, beside his low step, is still burning. He sits, he watches, he listens. The river runs. A small wind moves very briefly through the fronds of the nearest date palm, then settles. The watchman lifts his face, listens, sets it back down. He has heard in his long life on this wharf every small sound the river makes. He knows them all. The night is even tonight. Nothing is out of place. He looks down at his lamp. The wick is steady. He has in his pouch a small extra bit of oil if the lamp gets too low. He does not need it yet. The lamp can hold for another long while. He thinks of nothing in particular. He thinks of the small things one thinks of on the last watch of a calm night. He thinks of his daughter, who lives in a small house up the lane with her 2 children. He thinks of his own bed, which will hold him in a few hours after the 3rd watchman comes to take his place. He thinks of the soft warm bread that the 3rd watchman's wife always sends down to the wharf with him as a small kindness. He breathes in slowly. He breathes out slowly. He looks out once at the river. The river is dark. The river is constant. The river will be here tomorrow. He looks once at the stars. The stars above the city are very dim tonight. There is a faint, thin film of high cloud that has not yet drifted away. He can see in the gap of the cloud 3 or 4 of the brighter ones. He knows their names. The names are very old. They are the same names the woman in the brewery courtyard knows. They are the same names the scribes in the courtyards know. They are the same names the king, asleep in his palace chamber, knows. He sits. The stone in its workshop is in the dark. The king in his chamber is asleep. The river runs. The wharf is quiet. The palms are still. The lamps are out. The night is here. There is nothing more at this hour that the city needs to do. The stone will be finished tomorrow. The river will run tomorrow. The lamps will be lit again tomorrow. But tomorrow is far away. And so with the wharf in its calm, the stone in its dark, and the king in his quiet sleep. Let us very softly now, let the whole night begin to settle. A long time has passed since we first stood at the open doorway of the temple workshop. The polishers have gone home. The king has gone to his bed. The scribes have closed their courtyards. The brewers have covered their vats. The lending house has bolted its door. The surgeon has returned and gone to his own quiet sleep. The river has kept all evening its slow, steady murmur. The lamps along the wharf, one by one, have gone out. The city around us is sleeping now. If you could rise very gently and look down at it from above, the way the small birds in the high, cool air of the early morning will look down at it when the first light comes, you would see in the soft general dark only 1 or 2 small remaining lights, the watchman's lamp on the wharf, perhaps a second lamp somewhere far inside the city where another watchman is sitting on another low step, the river running through the middle, dark and steady, the orchards of date palms, dark and quiet, around the city's outer edge, the temple where the dark stone will one day stand in its finished court, set back from the river, its inner courts in shadow, the palace where the king is asleep, its inner chambers in shadow. You would see very softly, in the wider dark, the whole shape of a great city resting, and you would know, although the city itself does not know, that the stone in the workshop, the half-finished one, the one with its wet ribbon of polish, the one with its small carved sun god and its small carved king at the top, is going to outlast all of this. The city will rise and rise again under a different name, and fall again and rise again over the long centuries. The river will move slightly in its bed, the way rivers do over the years. The orchards will be replanted by other hands. The wharves will be rebuilt by other crews. The lamps will be made of different metals in different shapes. The names of the kings will change. The names of the cities will change. The very language of the people will change. But the stone will continue. It will be carried away. It will be buried. It will lie in the dark for almost 3,000 years. It will be lifted by careful hands in the spring of the year 1901. It will be set upright in a long glass hall in a city on the Seine. The looters will have left the words. The dust will have preserved the carving. The patient mercy of soft buried earth will have held this one dark column in keeping. The stone will outlive everything we have walked through this evening. The king does not know this. He is asleep. He cannot know. But what he ordered on the column is true. The line about the family that returns home in the 4th year is still readable today. The line about the surgeon and his careful hand is still readable. The line about the slow, patient daily work of holding a city together, all of it is still readable. The stone has done its small, quiet job. For now we leave the stone to its dark. We leave the king to his quiet. We leave the river to its slow, steady running. We leave the lamps to their last small burning. Now there is nothing more you need to hold. Let the workshop fade. Let the stone fade. Let the river fade. Let the city fade. Close your eyes. Breathe in slowly. Breathe out slower still. Let the day go. Let it all go. There is nothing here to hold. The night will keep you. Sleep well now.